Layla is Sumeru's best 4-star character yet, and here's why. She's got the second strongest shield in the game, only behind the omnipotent Archon Zhongli. Not only this, but her artifacts and weapons are pretty free-to-play friendly, her build options are very consolidated, and she isn't dependent on her later constellations. If you want to learn more about Layla, you've come to the right video. As always, this Layla build guide will cover her best artifacts and weapons to general playstyle and team compositions. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. From a casual standpoint, Layla is pretty simple. Her elemental skill generates a shield for 12 seconds, has a cooldown of 12 seconds, and scales extremely well with her HP. Compared to other 4-star characters, her shield's HP scaling blows everything else out of the water. 100% uptime on such a strong shield is just the cherry on top. When Layla's shield is active, it will generate a star every 1.5 seconds. If your active character casts an elemental skill while Layla's shield is active, then 2 stars will instantly be generated. Once Layla's shield has 4 stars attached to it, the 4 stars will fire off in a volley, dealing cryo damage. No more stars will be generated until the current volley of stars is finished hitting the enemy. People like to throw around the phrase split scaling a lot, and yes, this is at least half true for Layla. In her elemental skill talent, only her shield strength will scale off HP, while her volley of stars will scale off attack. Now before you freak out, I want to point out that the phrase split scaling is at least a tiny bit misleading, because with Layla's second ascension talent, her shield's volley of stars will get increased damage based on 1.5% of her max HP. Math-wise, this 1.5% is nowhere near as good as having an HP base multiplier, but at least it's a small buff to her skill's damage. What's really more important is her first ascension talent. When unlocked, every star that's generated by Layla's shield will increase the active character's shield strength by 6%. This effect is permanent until the shield expires and stacks up to 24%. So that means once you have started to fire off your first volley of stars for cryo damage, you have the maximum shield strength effect until the shield duration ends. For Layla's elemental burst, there's really just 2 things you need to know. First, Layla will put an orb in the sky like Ganyu does, and this orb will periodically generate starlight slugs to hit enemies for cryo damage that scales with her max HP. This ability has a 40 energy cost and a 12-second cooldown to match her shield's cooldown. Second, every time a starlight slug from Layla's burst hits an enemy, it will generate 1 extra star for her shield. Obviously, this is going to be huge because her shield generates stars quite slowly by itself. When combined with the fact that our teammates' elemental skills can artificially generate stars as well, we can produce stars for Layla's shield at a decently fast pace. This is important for the Theorycrafting section, which we'll cover right now. In regards to Theorycrafting, Layla breaks the boundaries just a little bit, but her nuances do not propel her to be extremely broken or painfully weak. Her nuances do, however, solidify her biggest strengths and her slight shortcomings when it comes to where she fits in with teams. Starting off with Layla's energy, she generates 1 to 2 cryo particles for every volley of stars she fires off with her shield. Given external factors like her elemental burst and teammates casting elemental skills, more often than not you're going to fire off a total of 3 volleys for her 12-second shield duration. This will average your energy generated to 4.5 cryo particles per 12 seconds, which is very comparable to Diona, who Layla is most similar to. The only difference being that Diona can front-load all of her cryo particles and funnel them into another character, while Layla is forced to slowly generate her particles over time. While Layla's energy generation is decent, she spends most of her time off-field. With this particle information in mind, even with a 40 energy cost burst, you're still going to need a decent chunk of energy recharge through weapons or artifacts. Generally, in double cryo teams, 140 to 150% energy recharge is more than enough to sustain Layla. But as a single cryo character, you might even find yourself wanting a number close to 180 to 200% energy recharge as a worst case scenario. C2 can make a huge difference for Layla's energy values, providing flat energy to herself, but otherwise how much energy recharge you need heavily depends on how much energy Layla's teammates can generate. The second in-depth mechanic to cover in this Theorycrafting section is internal cooldown. Just like how Layla's energy generation is a little bit peculiar, her internal cooldowns also get a little bit weird. At least for Layla's elemental burst, she follows the standard ICD rule of elemental application every 2.5 seconds. Considering each Starlight Slug takes about 1.5 seconds to hit, more often than not, every other Starlight Slug is going to apply crowd to the enemy. On the other hand, Layla's skill throws everything out the window and takes a completely different approach to internal cooldowns. Layla's volleys of stars from her shield have a limited crowd application of only 2 total applications over the duration of her 12-second shield. You might be thinking, wow, this sucks, and yes, it might suck for very specific teams, but I understand why Hoyoverse made this decision. Don't get me wrong, it would have been super cool to have her skill ICD be every 3 hits or every 2.5 seconds, because then we could accelerate her crowd application by spamming elemental skills with characters like Bennett. However, I also know that Hoyoverse wants to avoid creating another crazy broken 4-star support, so from their perspective, this decision makes sense. Overall, Layla doesn't really have much competition between other 4-stars, so she can slot into a lot of different teams that need shielding. Even with her strange elemental skill ICD, most teams like Fridge or Freeze don't require her to have crazy amounts of crowd application. Any team like Melt that does need a little more crowd application than what Layla can offer will always look to run double crowd with a character like Rosaria, who provides a ridiculous amount of crowd application and can battery Layla for energy. Layla's artifacts are anything but complicated. There are only a few sets you ever need to consider, and each option has pretty clear benefits depending on how you want to play Layla. With that being said, Layla has 2 playstyles. She can be a shield bot that only focuses on HP and energy recharge, or she can be a hybrid shielder and off-field DPS that focuses crit stats alongside HP and energy recharge. Before we deep dive into artifacts, I want to remind you that Layla's shield is only outstanding from the rest of the 4-star cast if you focus on getting the right stats like HP and shield strength. Building Layla as an off-field DPS with crowd damage and crit makes her shield no stronger than a similar character like Diona. If you want to build Layla purely for her shields, then the 4-set Tenacity of the Millelith is by far your best artifact set. Layla's energy generation and skill damage are dependent on her shield staying alive. If your shield is broken, then Layla becomes practically useless. This 4-set not only provides HP and shield strength for Layla's shield, but even at C0, Layla can have close to 100% uptime on the 20% attack buff for her teammates. You can also use the 4-set Tenacity of the Millelith for the off-field DPS build, and it's actually the most recommended set as well. Personally, I would not use anything other than the 4-set Tenacity on Layla due to the fact that her whole kit is predicated upon her shield staying alive. But there are other options if you're confident that you don't need that extra shield strength or you just want to try something different. The 4-set Blizzard Strayer is great for raw damage stats in Mono Cryo and Freeze teams and is only recommended for the hybrid DPS build. Meanwhile, the 4-set Noblesse serves as a generalist set that balances both damage and buffing capabilities. Given that Layla has a 12-second burst cooldown, the 20% attack buff on this set will theoretically have 100% uptime. In practice, however, casting burst off cooldown might not fit into your rotation, or you might lack the energy to do so every 12 seconds. Despite not providing any shield strength or HP for Layla's shield, this set will specifically shine in the shield bot build because you'll naturally have a lot of areas to focus energy recharge to spam your burst whenever possible. As for artifact stats, the shield bot Layla uses triple HP in the Sands Goblet and Circlet with energy recharge as a replacement in the Sand. On the flip side, an off-field DPS Layla uses HP in the Sands, crowd damage bonus in the Goblet, and crit in the Circlet. Both Layla builds need to focus at least some HP and energy recharge in substats, but crit rate and crit damage are also added into the substat focus if you're looking for damage. And lastly, crit rate is a good stat to focus for a shield bot Layla if you're using Favonius Sword. So don't be afraid to get some crit rate substats or even use a crit rate circlet in order to get consistency with the Favonius passive. As I discussed in the Theorycrafting section, despite having a 40 energy cost burst, Layla still needs some energy recharge due to staying off-field and having sporadic energy generation. The recommended minimum for both shield bot and off-field DPS builds is 140 to 150% energy recharge. Without C2 or a second crowd character, you may find yourself needing values higher than that, upwards of 200% energy recharge as a worst case scenario. Unfortunately, Layla's sword options are few and far between, but at least she has one standout option that's free to play and easily obtainable by anyone. So let's start off with that option. For a off-field DPS Layla, your best weapon is going to be Harbinger of Dawn. This 3-star weapon is perfect for Layla with high crit value and low base attack that doesn't harm Layla nearly as much thanks to some of her HP scalings. The conditional passive means nothing to Layla, who has both a shield and stays off-field most of the time. The pay-to-win option for an off-field DPS Layla is Primordial Jade Cutter. Again, we can see a pattern here with high crit value and low base attack for a 5-star sword. However, this weapon does not have a conditional passive and instead provides a small boost to Layla's HP and attack, which is always appreciated. As for a shield bot Layla, you can choose a few more non-crit swords since we're focused on maximizing her shield strength and energy generation. Technically, Layla's best weapon for shielding is Key of Cognizant, but most people won't have this sword, so the next recommendation is Favonius Sword. I name-dropped Favonius Sword in the artifact section because it is important to get crit rate with this weapon equipped for the passive. With enough crit rate, make sure that Layla is on the field to proc this passive and your team will have less energy problems, including Layla herself. This sword's huge ER stat and passive allows Layla to comfortably run HP in the stance instead of having to run ER. Beyond Key and Favonius, other options are not that beneficial to Layla's shield build. Certain ER swords like Sacrificial Sword, Skyward Blade, Festering Desire, and Skyrider's Sword are all great just to ease Layla's ER requirements in artifacts, but don't really do too much outside of that. Therefore, Harbinger of Dawn is the safest bet to use for a shield bot Layla if you're not running Key or Favonius Sword, because it can also be used if you decide to switch your Layla to an off-field DPS role. And last but not least, we've arrived at the Layla team section. Layla's ability to provide a strong shield and a consistent 20% attack buff with the 4-set Tenacity or Noblesse strikes a lot of similarity to Zhongli, making her a flexible support. The first team I'd like to cover is probably the most innovative meta team, using a variety of elements including Dendro. Although Layla's Cryo cannot react with Dendro, pairing Cryo, Hydro, and Dendro together is most popularly dubbed as Fridge teams by Theorycrafters. For non-theory crafters, the simplified idea is that Cryo and Dendro can exist on the enemy at the same time without reacting with one another. So when we apply Hydro, the bloom reaction can be created without erasing the Dendro aura, since some of the Hydro reacts with Cryo for freeze as well. A Fridge team will include Layla, an off-field Dendro character, a Hydro applicator, and an Electro character to create Hyper Blooms. These slots are very flexible in terms of what characters can play each role, so let me give you the best options for each slot if you don't know where to start. Beginning with the Dendro, it's pretty clear you have 3 options: Dendro MC, Nahida, or Kole. It doesn't matter which one you pick since the team is quick swap and even Kole can hold her own as a solo Dendro. Just make sure that this character is holding the 4-set Deepwood Memories to increase our Dendro reaction damage. For the Hydro applicator, most characters have enough Hydro application to make things work out. Kokomi, Child, and Ayato are the top 3 options for on-field driving, but Yelan and Xingqiu are always fantastic for Hydro application as well. Otherwise, Candice can give herself or other melee characters Hydro attacks to create blooms, while a completely free-to-play team can use Barbara to drive the team and equip her with the 4-set Ocean-Hued Clam to convert her healing into damage. And last but not least, the Electro character wants some way to consistently proc Hyper Blooms. Kuki Shinobu is the most popular Electro character to fulfill this role, but Raiden Shogun and Yai Miko are rising in popularity for hybrid EM builds, while Fischl is your other consistent off-field option that's not a 5-star character. Next up, we have Layla in a Freeze team. You probably saw this one coming already, and it's definitely the most basic setup with Layla. The team consists of Layla, a Cryo DPS, an off-field Hydro applicator, and Kazuha or Venti. The Cryo DPS slot is most often going to be Ganyu or Ayaka, but Rosaria and Kaya are your 4-star replacements to make the team a quick swap playstyle. The Hydro character is most often Kokomi, Yelan, Xingqiu, or Mona for various buffs to the team, along with off-field Hydro capabilities. Meanwhile, Kazuha is able to buff the team's elemental damage, and Venti is able to provide extra energy. Both characters can provide reduced elemental resistances with the 4-set Viridescent Veneerer. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. There's not much else to say for this team except for the fact that you can replace the Hydro character with Shenhe to make this a full mono Cryo team instead of a Freeze team. It's definitely a fun replacement to try if you're up against enemies that cannot be frozen. And last but not least, here's a little fun team you can try out if you like pushing the boundaries and trying out new things. Here, this team takes advantage of the mechanic that allows Layla's shield to generate 2 stars for every elemental skill casted by her on-field teammate. We pair Layla with Bennett to get Pyro Melt reactions on his elemental skills, which in turn generate stars extremely fast for Layla due to Bennett's extremely low cooldown on his elemental skill. For the other teammates, generally we're going to want Rosaria in the 3rd slot and either Sucrose or Kazuha in the last slot to provide Res Shred with the 4-set Virtus and Veneerer and buff the damage of our Pyro and Cryo characters simultaneously. Rosaria is almost an irreplaceable character given how much she provides to the team. Not only does she provide sufficient cryo application and cryo energy for Layla, but she also provides a huge amount of crit rate so that we can balance Bennett's crit stats much better than we usually could. The cryo resonance will grant 15% crit rate to enemies affected by cryo, while Rosaria can provide up to 15% more crit rate with the buff from her elemental burst. This team might not be the best team out there, but it's definitely something fun to play around with. There are plenty of other teams that Layla can fit into as a general shielder like Eula or Itto hypercarry teams. Eula's team can use Eula, Layla, Fischl, and Beidou, while the Itto team can use Itto, Layla, Goro, and Albedo as example team setups. For the sake of the video's length, I won't cover any more teams today and hopefully you understand. With that, let me know your thoughts on Layla, whether it be questions about your builds, teams, or general opinions down in the comments below. Good luck to everyone pulling for Layla, and other than that, that's all I have time for today. If you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and channel. You can follow me on Twitch or TikTok, or sub to the YouTube channel, whatever people do nowadays. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.